What's up, everybody? I hope everyone has been doing good, and I hope your summer has been going really great. I have been trying to get this video posted and edited for the past 6 months, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. It has been a video that I have been struggling so much with figuring out how I'm going to present this information to you. So what I've come up with for the Project Turbo Diesel XJ is I'm going to create a series of videos. And I already did an introduction video a while back. I think that was back in November or December. I'm going to put a little link up here if you want to check it out. But I did that video, and it was in the midst of the swap, and there was so much stuff going on. And it's kind of funny because I remember in that video saying some comment about in about a week and a half I'll be wrapped up and driving the thing. Well, I ran into tons of issues, and it ended up being about 4 months that I was working on this thing to get to the point where I could drive it every day to work. So needless to say, it's been a crazy journey. I learned a lot, and I feel like I'm now at the point where I could present this information to you. So what I'm going to do is actually another introduction video. This is going to be the official introduction where I'm going to dive into a bunch of details, but I'm going to kind of keep some of the topics surface level. So you're going to see me showing you stuff under the hood, which we're going to get over there in a second, but I'm not going to dive into all of the how-tos. So this is where you come in. If you're interested in this whole swap, maybe you're into Jeeps, maybe you're gonna do your own diesel swap and you just want to ask a bunch of questions, this is your time to drop comments down below, and I'm gonna read and respond to every single one. And the feedback you give me is gonna help me decide what future videos in this series that I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna be upfront and tell you I have about a half dozen already that I've either scheduled out, mapped out, and written my notes down, or I've even some of those started shooting the videos for, all surrounding this turbo diesel swap. So this is going to be a series that you'll be able to search and reference for your diesel swap or even just your enjoyment. Let's get over here and pop the hood on this Jeep, and I'm going to show you how this OM617 fits under the hood. There it is. So as you can see, this motor fits really tight. Now when I started researching these motor swaps and I started thinking about what I wanted to put in, there's a couple things that I said I would consider. One of them was the Cummins 4-cylinder, the 4BT. The other one was the 1.9 liter turbo diesel, the TDI from Volkswagen. And then obviously this motor. Now there's benefits to all three of those motors. The TDI is the smallest by far of all three of those. The OM617 and the 4BT are going to be similar sizes, but 4BTs are incredibly tall. They're just insanely beefy. The OM617 fits pretty much like the 4.0 liter straight six did. So there's a couple things that I wanted to maintain with this swap. First and foremost was I wanted every factory function that this Jeep had to work before and after this swap. So that means power windows, power locks, my key fob, all my gauges including my tach, my speedometer, fuel gauge, all of that stuff had to work. My air conditioning. So I went at this probably a little more in depth than some people would do for a turbo diesel swap, but I'm happy I did because now I have a vehicle that runs and drives just like it did from factory back in 1999. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned I had a ton of issues. Now, I said I was running the Mercedes diesel 4x4 kit, and there's a lot of that kit that is really good, and it worked out great for me. But then there's aspects of that kit that was just a nightmare. It actually led to me seizing two of these OM617 motors and ultimately having to rebuild this one from the bottom up. So this motor has new main bearings, rod bearings, rings, valve guides and seals. The valves are lapped. The cylinder head was checked. It has a new head gasket, new head bolts. All of that stuff has been replaced. So there's a benefit to that because now I have a fresh motor and I have 10,000 miles on this swap now. So the motor only has 10,000 miles on it. But the downside is I spent over $2,000 just getting the issues fixed after running into those issues. And what caused that was I used the oil filter relocation kit from Mercedes diesel 4x4, and the actual diagram for this kit was backwards. So essentially we starved the motor for oil because we followed the instructions that came with the kit. So that was very unfortunate, but it's one of those things where we were neck deep in this swap. So what are you going to do? Just give up? And that wasn't an option. I already had so much money into this thing. The only logical solution was rebuild the motor that we have at hand, and ultimately that's what we did. The reason I ended up going with that oil filter relocation kit was because on the OM617s they have an oil filter housing that mounts directly to the block, and on a Jeep Cherokee this motor is so close to the firewall that the factory oil filter housing just simply does not fit. And so that's why I decided I wanted to run an oil filter relocation. It's just unfortunate that the instructions were backwards, and it ultimately led to the destruction of 2 motors. But I will say the company helped me out financially after the fact, stood by the mistake, and has corrected it for future swaps. Now you can find adapters for the AW4 automatic, but if it were me, the 5-speed is the way to go. It just keeps things simple. You don't have to worry about the transmission control module and communicating all of the shifting with the computer, with a diesel that's mechanical that doesn't give any signals to the computer. It's doable. I know people who have done it, but I'm glad that I had the AX15. It definitely simplified it. So if you think about it this way, you have an adapter that bolts to the block of the OM617, and then you have a crank adapter that bolts to the Mercedes crank but has the flywheel pattern for the AX15 flywheel, and then your flywheel bolts to that adapter. So I'm running a Luke heavy duty clutch that would work with a factory Jeep Cherokee XJ AX15 transmission, and it's the factory slave cylinder. You can use the factory starter because the starters on these mount to the bell housing. So that stuff is very straightforward. The motor mount kit from Mercedes diesel 4x4 is great. Comes with the rubber mounts. It bolts directly into the factory location of the Jeep Cherokee motor mount. So that was very simple. We essentially bolted the motor to the transmission, dropped everything in place, mounted the cross member, and that's going to locate my motor and trans at the exact same location as stock. So I didn't have to change my drive shafts or do anything different with that. And then ultimately that's going to find the location for your motor mounts, which you bolt the backing plates to the unibody, and then you do have to weld on the brackets themselves. But you just kind of center up the motor on your motor hoist with ratchet straps, figure out where you're at, and then ultimately weld them, tack weld them in, pull them out, and weld them fast. So it's nothing super difficult to get the motor into the Jeep Cherokee. Where you run into tons of issues is things like the AC compressor, the power steering pump, because I wanted to run AC, and the intercooler. And I decided to run a front mount intercooler, which is actually up front here in front of the radiator. That was an insanely difficult project to get fit in there, and you can see the charge pipes going down underneath. I had to cut a notch in the unibody to run them up front, and then I actually had to space the radiator back about 1 inch to clear the 2.5 inch wide intercooler. So all of that was definitely difficult, but totally worth doing, because if you're not cooling down the air coming from the turbocharger and you run a fuel injector pump, which I'll get into shortly, like what I'm running, your intake temps are going to skyrocket, and you're going to lose some of the efficiency and the available air and power that would come from the added fuel. So the intercooler, in my opinion, was a must. Now the problem with running the intercooler piping up front was I was not able to run a standard mechanical fan. So I actually have a stock Jeep Cherokee XJ, one of the late model auxiliary fans. This is one of the, it's either 10 or 11 blades. It's more efficient than the older 80s through early to mid 90s style fans. And then I have an 8-inch fan over on the right side of the radiator, and I have room for one more 8-inch. But total, the measured CFM of both fans together is somewhere in the ballpark of 3,000 to 3,200 CFM. And as of this point, even with the AC on, I have had no issues with overheating. And I do want to clarify about the radiator. This is no special oversized radiator. This is a 100% stock radiator for a Jeep Cherokee, and it keeps the motor very cool. The thermostat's 176 degree thermostat. My fans are on a mechanical switch, so when I see that the thermostat is opening, that's normally when I'll trip the fans on. And you know, just kind of maintain that water temp. And honestly, with the fans on, even on a hot day, 85, 90 degrees, it'll bring the water temp from 190 down to below the temperature where the thermostat will open. So I am kind of flipping the fan off and on and monitoring the water temps, but that's how I have it wired for now. I didn't really want to have it on any kind of thermostat at this point because I just didn't know how this thing was going to run. I didn't want to risk anything with it, and I wanted to be in complete control over when these fans are running and how cool this motor's running. As far as the fuel pump, I touched on that a little bit. I am running a Diesel Mechan 7.5 millimeter pump. This has 7.5 millimeter elements. To give you an example, the stock pump had 5.5 millimeter elements. And stock, these motors only put out about 120 to 125 horsepower to the crank. It is putting out way more than that now. I wouldn't be surprised if, and in fact I have friends that have dynoed these, and with that Diesel Mechan pump, an intercooler, and a straight 3-inch exhaust, they double their horsepower. So that was what I was hinting at when I was sitting over here by the fire, was I knew that if I added fuel and I added air, that I could get way more power out of this motor. Now, I am running the stock turbocharger right now, and those are very undersized. They spool up well pretty quickly. It's only a 2 1/4 or 2.5 inch outlet on the exhaust side of the turbocharger. So although I'm running 3-inch exhaust, there is a restriction directly after the turbo. I had to make a flange. I burned out the plate on the CNC table and I flared up to 3 inches. Now there's a key reason why I decided to run 3-inch exhaust right away, and that's because I have a whole set HX30W turbocharger off of a 4BT motor, and that is going to be a way more efficient turbocharger. It has the ability to provide more boost and stay within its power, its efficiency range at those higher boost levels. I mentioned briefly the AC. I have a family and 3 toddlers right now, so running around on a hot Pennsylvania 150% humidity and 95-degree day without AC was not an option. So what I did was I fabricated these brackets and I used 5/16 threaded rod to tension the AC compressor. I mounted a sand-in compressor, and I'm going to put that part number for this sand-in compressor down at the bottom, and I'll do a whole video on just the compressor at a later date. But this is not the stock Jeep compressor, and the reason why is because the OM617 uses V-belts instead of serpentine. So I had to look for a compressor that met the specifications of the stock Jeep compressor, but had a V-belt pulley system, but had the same adapter as the stock Jeep AC lines. And that wasn't easy, but through working through a company that does AC compressors, and I'll put a link to their company down below, they helped me figure out this sand-in compressor. And needless to say, other than the mount itself, it was plug and play with my factory lines, with my plug for my Jeep Cherokee. It just plugged right in for the power source for the clutch. One of the things that I had to do to get the AC bracket to where it's at is I actually had to space the power steering pump, which is down here, out about 3 inches. And that is not standard, and that is not what most people do, but I did not want to try to fit an AC compressor down low like most people do. I didn't want it going through rain and mud and all that other crap that happens when you're going off-roading. Didn't want to hit on rocks and things. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to stray away from what everybody else is doing, and I am going to mount it up top. And I'm really glad I did, because it fits well. I had to cut a nice little notch in my hood. Not through the hood, but just some of these cross supports. I had to notch them a little bit to clear this section of the compressor. And this is stuff that you're going to run into with a swap. And although it's a pain in the butt sometimes, this is half of the fun, is figuring out how are you going to solve this issue, because you can't rely on factory engineers from any car manufacturer to do this for you, because you are creating a non-standard vehicle, essentially. So I had to think outside of the box with some of this stuff in order to make this happen. I also had to push the fuel filter, which is down here, back 3 inches to clear the inlet port for my compressor so that we could charge this compressor up at the shop. I already mentioned the oil filter relocation. I put my catch tank for the radiator over here. I'll pop this off. It's right near where the computer mounts from factory. It's just the stock coolant catch tank. this works. I mean, it's nothing fancy. It doesn't really look refined, I will say. Hey, we are throwing caps today. Throwing caps, gotta find that thing now. Okay, we found the cap and we are back at it. So this isn't the most refined way to catch your coolant, but hey, it works. I used the stock Jeep Cherokee steering box and the Mercedes OM617 power steering pump, and I had to take a trip down to my local hydraulic, I guess you'll call it a hydraulic shop, to help me create the lines for this, because you're talking two totally different styles of connectors from the Jeep to the Mercedes. And on my website, eventually I'll put up a blog along with a video diving into that topic, and you're starting to see why this is going to become a very extensive lineup of videos, because there is so much information to swallow here. So the OM617 has its own vacuum pump, and because of that I could run the standard Jeep Cherokee brake booster and master cylinder. None of that changed. I didn't move anything there. All I did was take the vacuum line and feed it into the vacuum pump. Same thing with the Jeep Cherokee accessories. I just plugged in the vacuum line to the circuit, the check valve here for the vacuum pump, and all of my flippers in my AC, I guess you'll call them vents, whatever, dampers, whatever you call them, the little flippy things that shut vents and open others, they're vacuum controlled on this thing. So you need to supply vacuum to that. But something to keep in mind when you are doing this swap, get rid of your vacuum canister if you're not going to change the vacuum system itself. Because what that does is that holds vacuum and limits you from using this little device here. Even after you shut off your vehicle, that little canister is going to hold vacuum in the system. And what this is up here is a shutoff from a factory Mercedes 300D. It is vacuum controlled. Essentially, this is a little 12-volt solenoid that when you cut power to it, it opens up and it allows vacuum to flow to the fuel injector pump, which will actually pull the fuel rack to the shut location, and it'll shut the motor down. So if you have a reservation of vacuum in that vacuum canister, you'll be able to shut your vehicle off, but then when you go to try to restart it, you're going to have vacuum, which is going to limit the ability for this thing to work, and your fuel rack is going to stay in the closed position. So stuff to keep in mind. I used a starter solenoid off of some old Ford or something that I bought at Advance Auto or AutoZone for my glow plugs. They're on a manual switch. This is just like a beefy relay. I've got a 8-gauge wire going back to the battery to supply voltage to my glow plugs, and just a little wire here to a switch on my dash that when the key is on, I can flip my glow plugs on and let them sit for about 5 seconds. I turn the switch off, this thing will fire right up. And then if I turn the key off, the glow plugs go off. So I made it in a way that there's no way that I could forget if the key is off. Now if I leave the key in the on position and my glow plugs are on, I'm going to kill my battery and probably smoke my glow plugs, and that's on me, and I'll have to buy some more glow plugs. As I said before, I'm running the stock turbocharger, and typically these turbos just are clocked and they have a little adapter that shoots right into the intake manifold. No intercooler from factory, and I think that's really dumb on a diesel, but I guess I get why Mercedes did it, because they were underfueled and underpowered, and I mean, why not just make a bad situation worse, right? But either way, what I had to do was actually, when I had the turbocharger off and I had the compressor housing apart, I TIG welded on an adapter that flares up to 2.5 inches on the compressor side. We TIG welded an aluminum plate over the original factory intake location, and then we cut and TIG welded an aluminum pipe, a 2.5 inch pipe, onto the intake here for the cold side of the compressed air after the intercooler. So that took a lot of work to figure out and get all of that situated. I know a lot of people run these things without intercoolers, but honestly, I'm telling you, if you are going to run a diesel mech and pump and you're going to get the boost up on these things, you need to intercool the air. It's not if, it is put an intercooler on. Spend the extra time, do it right the first time to avoid headaches down the road. Just trust me on that, and if you get nothing else from this video, run an intercooler. Run an intercooler, run an intercooler. So this is kind of ironic because this is a factory upper radiator hose for a Jeep Cherokee. I think I cut like 2 inches off of it, but it fit in here nice, so I used it. I just actually the other week reworked this intercooler pipe so it dips below the radiator hose. So that's why this one's not painted right now. I just wanted to make it and run it, make sure it works. This is also what gave me the extra clearance for that second 8-inch fan, because stuff is tight up here. And I'll get the camera and I'll flip it around here at some point and show you, but there's probably a 1/2 inch of clearance between the fans and the pulleys. So yeah, it's tight. So every inch counts when you're doing this OM617. And if you're running a front mount intercooler, you are going to run into space issues. Now, I have friends on the OM617 Facebook group that mounted top mount intercoolers and have a hood scoop, so that's an option as well. I wanted to stay away from that because I know how much heat that compressor side of the turbocharger is going to be throwing off. And I wanted to do everything possible to get as much cold air through that intercooler to get the air density up, to make sure I have cooler air going into the intake. So that's why I went the route that I did versus a top mount intercooler. What I ended up doing for the throttle cable was I made this little bent bracket on our CNC table out of 14 gauge steel. It's just a little 90 bent. There's a square. And what that little bracket allowed me to do is keep that throttle cable stock. And everything that I could keep stock is great. I mean, the less things you have to change, the better. But then I just had to put a little machine bolt here with a couple nuts. I drilled a hole through the throttle cable itself on the end, removed the clip that used to be there, and now I have a throttle cable that works. And I do actually make these throttle brackets, and I do have them available for sale. I don't have them on my website yet. Currently, at the time of this video, I am selling these for $32 shipped with hardware, washers, and the hardware for your throttle cable end, along with very detailed instructions on how to do this. In other words, it takes you 5 minutes. So now that I gave you a very fast rundown without too much detail of this swap and what I did, I'm going to fire it up and let you listen to it. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm going to start it and you can watch the exhaust. Deal? Cool. I hope that made you as excited as it makes me. Okay, I also thought it would be a great idea to show you guys how this thing runs from the inside. And the coolest part about the OM617, or one of the coolest parts I should say, is it's a really well-balanced motor. It doesn't shake a lot. I've been in vehicles that had 4BTs in them, and they rattle like crazy. Now the 1.9 turbo diesel from the Volkswagens probably is also going to be fairly smooth, but this 5-cylinder just idles like, I don't know, how do you describe smooth idling? Like glass? I don't know, but anyway, start this thing up. So yeah, there's a little bit of rattle from some of the plastic pieces, but do I have a water bottle in here? Like, I don't know. Can you see the water there? Because it's not shaking. How about there? Can you see that? Yeah, like this thing doesn't vibrate at all, and it definitely doesn't vibrate really any more than the original 6-cylinder that stayed in this thing. I mean, there's definitely times you can feel it. You have a diesel in here, especially when you're loading it and you're boosting pretty good. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's just like a factory Jeep. Okay, I'm gonna shut this thing down now and we'll move on. And again, it shuts off and starts with the factory key. Yeah, it's that simple. Now with the key on, I have all of my gauges lighting up. I have access to all the factory gauges that the Jeep Cherokee had. And I did add a boost gauge up here and a pyrometer, because when you add extra fuel to a diesel, you need to make sure you're getting extra boost, for one. You need to match that extra fuel with air. But then when you do that, you need to be watching your exhaust temps. I have a little gauge probe in the exhaust manifold before the turbocharger. Make sure that if you put one in yours, put it before the turbo. If you put your gauge sensor after the turbocharger, you could be a couple hundred degrees different than what your vehicle is actually experiencing with your exhaust gas temps. And why the EGTs are so extremely important is because aluminum melts at around 1,220 some degrees. Now, it is different with a vehicle like this because you have oil squirting on the undersides of the pistons, you've got coolant flowing through the cylinder head, so you've got stuff going on that's going to allow you to run the EGTs higher than the melting point of aluminum. But let's be real, do you really want to be running your vehicle at over 1,200 degrees on your exhaust gas side? For me, that's a big no. So when I'm pulling or when I'm on the highway and I'm driving, I make sure that I don't hold it at more than 1,200 degrees. And if I'm at 1,200 degrees, I try to only hold it there for just a couple seconds. And if I see that I'm getting to 1,200, I normally shift down to the lower gear, and then the RPMs go up. I'm moving more air. I make sure I have boost, and the EGTs will just drop really quick. So driving on the highway, my EGTs are normally around 800 to 900 degrees, doing between 70 and 80 miles an hour. If I'm on an uphill grade and I'm in fifth, it's normal for me to see 1,100 degrees, upwards of 1,150, and I'm fine cruising at those temps. Your motor might be different, your setup might be different, so don't take those numbers as gospel, but that's what I'm personally comfortable with. And if I see that they're creeping up any higher, just drop it down into fourth gear. And I've had no problems. So here is the layout of my dash. Again, nothing exciting, all factory. Every gauge works in my gauge cluster, and the only exception to that is my fuel sending unit just took a crap on me. And that does not work anymore, unfortunately. But I just need to get a new sending unit and drop the tank, and that'll work again. Radio works. There's the 5-speed shifter and my tripod, which has nothing to do with the function of the Jeep. So guys, I thought that the last thing that I should do in this video was jump in the Jeep and take you for a spin, and that's what we're gonna do. So let's hop in here and go for a quick drive. A lot of people have asked me what it's like to drive the turbo diesel Jeep. And for the most part, it is just like driving the Jeep as it was when it had the original motor. Now, obviously, there's a lot that's changed with this thing since the diesel swap. It does drive differently. It has more power than it had before. But for the most part, my swap is a turnkey swap. What I mean by turnkey is, if I showed you where the glow plug switch is, I could get you into this thing, you could turn the key, drive away with it, and after you're running and driving, it drives just like a normal lifted Jeep Cherokee. Nothing else. Feels different, there's no other quirks. Just a couple extra gauges to pay attention to, but nothing crazy. And that was kind of my whole goal with this swap, was keep it feeling like a factory Cherokee, but have the turbo diesel. I don't know how well it's picking up the sounds, but hopefully you guys can hear the turbo whistling in the background. And I'm not beating on this thing, I'm just kind of babying it up over the mountain. But it is a totally different beast, but maintains a lot of the characteristics of a standard Jeep Cherokee, which is nice. Okay, so this video I know was all over the place. I went over tons of stuff that I'm sure you're like, wait, show me. A couple extra details to consider when you're doing this swap, and I know I'm going to throw this out at you and you're going to have questions, but rest assured I will go into detail on this topic. The OM617 is a front sump motor, which means the oil pump is actually in the front of the motor, and that causes some major problems for a solid axle vehicle. So you are going to have to modify your steering. You're going to have to run a massive drop pitman arm, and I even had to drop my track bar by 2 inches. And I will go into full details on how I did that in a future video, but I'm just trying to give you that information to let you know this is not a simple bolt-in motor swap that you're going to be turning key in the same weekend and driving away with it. There's a lot of extra stuff you're going to run into, and the extent of the amount of work you have to do to clear that oil pan is pretty much 100% dependent on the lift you're running and the kind of steering you're running up front. If you're running stock steering, you're going to have some pretty big issues. I'm running 1-ton steering on the front of my Jeep, so that gave me a little bit more clearance and changed where the drag link and the tie rod location are a little bit over stock. I actually ended up fabricating my own oil pan, but all of that is dependent on your setup specifically, and I can't really give you a definitive answer when I go into those videos of this is going to work for you, because it does depend so much on how your Jeep is set up. The last thing I wanted to add into this video is the cost, and that's probably the #1 question that I get from people is how much am I going to spend? And there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet that says you can get these motors for 700 bucks, the swap kit's 1,000 bucks, and for 2,500 bucks you'll be driving down the road. And I can tell you, if somebody did this swap for 2,500 bucks, something's not right, or they don't have full function of their factory controls, or it's barely driving down the road, but if you went off-road, the oil pan doesn't have enough clearance to clear the steering, and you'd run into all kinds of issues. You're going to spend a lot of money on this swap. I have over $6,000 now at this point into this swap, and I'm almost to the point where I'm quote-unquote done. And by done, I don't mean done with the Jeep, I mean done with the swap, to the point where I'm just going to drive it for a couple years and not really mess with any motor accessories or anything like that. But be prepared, in my opinion, to spend between $3,000 to $3,500, upwards of $6,000 to $7,000 to do this exact same swap, to maintain your air conditioning, to rework your steering and your suspension so you can actually have full articulation when you're off-road, clearing that oil pan, doing all of the extra modifications it takes to maintain factory function. Now, I will say I had added costs in this whole thing because I did rebuild this entire motor with the help of my good friend and business partner Tyler, and you may not have that. You might find the motor for 500 bucks and spend 2,000 on the adapter kit and everything, and you might have only 2,500 into it. If you can do it and you have the tools on hand and the knowledge and the capabilities to fabricate like I did on this thing, yeah, you're going to be doing it cheaper than someone who has to buy everything. But that's something that I think you should definitely be considering when you are thinking about doing what I did to my Jeep. One of the other main questions that I get is, what's the fuel economy like? And these OM617 motors were not known for their fuel economy even in their original factory application. So I didn't go into this expecting to have 35 miles to the gallon. I was hoping to have more power than a 4.0 liter and have better fuel economy. And I can tell you all day that I have more power than the 4.0 liter would put out. But I'm gonna save that quote-unquote fact for a future video, because I'm gonna be taking this thing to get dyno tested at some point. And then we'll be able to prove on paper what kind of power this thing's putting out. But I can tell you that I've been getting 24 miles per gallon city driving, and I drive over mountains to get to work. Half-hour commute, one way, over 35, 40 miles of driving every single day, and I'm getting 24 miles to the gallon. And when I get on the highway, if I keep it at about 70 miles an hour, I'm getting 26 to 27 miles per gallon. And that's with 33-inch tires, 3.55 gears, and the AX15 factory 5-speed. So yes, it's way better than the 4.0 liter. I was getting 15 to 17 before, so I'm getting about 10 miles per gallon better. Now, diesel fuel's more expensive, but I don't really care. I didn't build this thing to save money. I built it because I could, and I wanted to prove to the world that, hey, I've got the capabilities to do a turbo diesel swap. So here we are. Last thing before I end this video, and this is a long video, and I'm sorry it went so long, but at the same time, with the amount of questions I've been getting, I wanted to do this video right as the first official overview. But what am I going to do in the future to this Jeep? Now that I've got the turbo diesel swap almost done, what's the next thing? Well, the next thing is I'm going to gear this thing lower. I am also hoping to work with some companies to get this thing outfitted more for overlanding and off-roading and long distance traveling. One of the things I would like to do is put an 8-inch long arm lift kit on this thing. And I know that's kind of wild and it's insane and that's huge, but I've always wanted to just jack one of these things up, and I've always only ever had 4.5 to 6 inches of lift on a Cherokee. I just would love to make something really nasty that can flex and go anywhere, anytime. I'm hopefully going to be building a rear cargo carrier for this thing that folds up and out of the way for wheeling. I'm just going to fabricate that at the shop, and I'll have some videos on that. Adding a roof rack to this, as well as inside storage for longer distance trips. There's a lot of stuff that I want to get into with this Jeep, and I've owned it now for 8 years, and I've done a lot of work to it. I've never documented any of it because, I mean, 8 years ago I wasn't doing YouTube. I was still in college wasting time at classes that had nothing to do with my degree, but I digress. And now I'm just wanting to share with you the journey of building a Jeep Cherokee, and it's stuff that pumps me up, and I hope it pumps you up. And the coolest part about this kind of stuff is what works for me doesn't have to work for you. You might like stuff that I don't like, I might like stuff that you don't like. But we have this huge community in the off-road world and in the Jeep world of people that can still appreciate what other people are doing with their vehicles, even if it's a little different than what they might have done to theirs. But anyway, guys, I rambled for way too long in this video. I'm going to wrap it up here. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I really need you to leave comments down below and ask me questions. I'm going to commit to responding to every one of them. Unless I get like thousands, then I'm just not going to be able to keep up, but I don't foresee that. But I'm going to respond to these things, and then I'm going to look for recurring themes. If 100 people ask me to see how did I do the AC brackets, I'm going to make a brand new AC bracket in a video, show you how I fabricated it, burned it, designed it, mounted everything, all the specs, all that stuff, and hopefully give you and arm you with the ability and the knowledge to go about your motor swap in a way that was much smoother than my own and gives you the same end result. Guys, I really appreciate you sticking through this video and checking out my content and subscribing to my page. It does mean the world to me. I really do appreciate it. And I know you're typically used to seeing firearms related content, but I'm not just all about guns. I really like doing other stuff with my Jeep, my family, traveling, exploring, hiking, hunting, fishing, all that stuff. So I'm hoping to incorporate all of my world into my YouTube page so you get to know me better and the things that I like to do in the great state of Pennsylvania. Guys, hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, shoot me an email anytime, KeystoneCarryPA@gmail.com. Make sure you're following me on Instagram. The Instagram handle is @KeystoneCarry. Keystone Carry, C-A-R-R-Y, and make sure you follow me there. Guys, until the next time, the next video, the next day, the next whatever it might be, stay well, stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.